Welcome to One Life. My name's Lane. If I haven't met you yet, I would love to get to know you. East Campus would love to get to know you. Had a lot of fun hanging out with you last week. We are concluding a series today called God of the Underdogs, and we've been looking at the excuses that we make as underdogs. And one of the things that we've realized throughout this series is that we actually kind of relate to the underdog. We kind of like the underdog. When the underdog wins, we celebrate because we see ourselves in just about every underdog. And every underdog has excuses. And today's excuse is that I am disadvantaged. I am disadvantaged. So this excuse kind of sounds like this, right? I can't do what God's called me to do because I am not this. I have never done that. I don't have this level of education. I don't have this advantage in life. I am disadvantaged, and therefore I can't live the kind of life that God would have me live, and I can't live the life that I want to live. I can't live a full and fulfilled life because I am disadvantaged. Now, all of us are disadvantaged, and I realized one of my very pronounced disadvantages when I was in middle school. I went out for basketball. Now, I don't sports. I'm not a sports guy. I know that this is going to be hard for some of you to understand or even handle, but I'm so not a sports guy that I had a friend call me a couple weeks ago to tell me that UT lost, and I didn't even know it happened. Although I was downtown that day when the game ended, and my wife and I were like walking around, and it was like this procession of zombies walking away from the stadium like this. Anybody know what I'm talking about? So I had an idea that we didn't win that day, but like I didn't know because I hadn't checked the score, didn't watch the game. So somebody had to tell me. So I'm not a sports guy. And the reason why I'm not a sports guy, most of it is just because of a traumatic thing that happened to me when I was in 7th grade. And I'll show you what it looked like right here. I went out for basketball. Now, I expected this to get a little bit more laugh, but maybe there's just pity and you don't want to go there. But so this was when I was in 7th grade, and people told me, listen, you're tall, and that's all it takes to be good at basketball, so why don't you go out for basketball? So I went out, and here's what I didn't understand about organized sports at the time. I was in 7th grade, and by 7th grade, every 7th grader at Mustang Middle School in Mustang, Oklahoma, where I'm from, every 7th grader had been playing organized basketball for 10 years. Like, they were all veterans. They all understood the rules. They all knew everything except for me, right? And I grew up in the era of Michael Jordan, but I didn't know the difference between Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, okay? I had no idea what I was doing, so I show up thinking they're going to teach us the fundamentals, like we're all in the same, boat, whatever. Not the case, okay? So the first 2 weeks of practice, this is where the coaches are just running us ragged, hoping that the scrubs will just quit. I didn't have sense enough to quit. I stayed there the whole time, and I don't know why, but I lasted. And so it came time for them to split us into A team and B team. And here's what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, they're going to see some kind of potential in me, right? I did know that Michael Jordan had been cut from his basketball team when he was 12 years old, and then he went on to be Michael Jordan, right? Okay, so I thought, I'm not good. I knew I wasn't good, but I thought maybe they'll see a potential in me. Maybe they'll see something that I don't see, and they'll go ahead and put me in the A team. I don't expect to start, but maybe they'll put me in the A team, and I can be a good basketball player. So they start naming off the names of the people that are going to be on the A team, and they're listing off the names. And this is like the elite class, some of the first names, like, yeah, of course, like that guy, we know he's going to be in the A team. They're high-fiving each other, all this stuff, celebrating, their opulence of success in basketball. Well, it ends, okay? They go through all the names, and I'm not on that list. I'm like, okay, this is fine. I'll be on the B team, I'll prove myself, and then maybe one day I'll get to be on the A team. Well, then they start listing off names of the B team. I'm like, wait a second. Aren't we all on the B team? Like, aren't we all just kind of the leftover losers that are left to be on the B team? I thought, okay, this is just a formality. They're just naming off names to let us all know that, okay, you're here, you're on the B team, you're on the roster, whatever. So they're naming off, and I'm kind of listening for my name, thinking totally it's a formality, but I'm going to listen anyway. Well, they go through all the names, and I'm not on that list. So we got the A team, we got the B team. A team's really happy, B team's almost as happy. And then there were 6 of us failures left over, sitting there, waiting to hear our fate. And I'm looking around, I'm going, I don't know why I'm with these people, okay, because I ought to be on the A team. So the coach comes over, all right, like the assistant coach. And he walks over and he says, guys, unfortunately this is a public school, so we can't cut anybody. So we had to make a C team for you bunch of losers. And you'll be practicing in the old PE building, which, by the way, no longer exists. It's been condemned. They just tore it down. But you'll be in the PE building, and just try to stay out of our way, throw the ball around, and we'll try to create some opportunities for you to play basketball this year. And we just hope that you'll go away. All right? So that's what they told us. And so, nevertheless, C team was a team. And So it comes time for our first game, and I am scared to death because if you don't know how this works, the way our games were, the A team played at prime time. They played at 7 o'clock. The B team played at 5 o'clock. The C team, we played at 3 o'clock. Okay, we were like the matinee game, and it was so scary because there was like 14 people in the entire place, right? But we go in there, and I'm so scared, I'm so nervous, and there's 6 of us. Now, here's what you need to understand about basketball. In basketball, there are only 5 people on the field, on the mat, on the court at one time. Okay, now on the C team, there were 6 people on the C team, okay? And I was one of those 6 people. And so I'm thinking, well, surely, I didn't get on the A team, I understand that. B team, kind of offended there. C team, but I'm gonna start on the C team, like, right? I was wrong. I did not start on the C team. Now, some of you are feeling bad. It's going to get worse. Just hang in there, okay? So I'm actually kind of happy about this because this means that I don't have to go play because there were no other teams in the district, in the area that had C teams. So we had to play B teams, which was really scary, okay? We were like their warm-up game before they played their actual game at 5 o'clock. Really scary stuff, playing B teams. And so I was actually just glad that I could just sit there and enjoy watching the game on the bench. And so we get about 30 points behind, and the game's like almost over. It's the last quarter or the last inning or whatever the thing is. And so the coach looks over at me, and he realizes, oh yeah, I got to put him in, that guy. And so he hands me a towel, and he says, go in for number 42. So I don't know anything about basketball, so I just like run onto the court after number 42, like mid-play, like number 42, come here. So everybody goes mad, he gets mad, whistles are blowing, he's like, get back over here, go over. So I have to do it the proper way. You sit down, you kneel down at the booth, and you wait. And I'm like shaking, I'm so nervous. And so it comes time for a foul shot, which is where somebody breaks a rule and they get a free shot. And so he says, okay, now, dum-dum, go in for number 42 now. So I run over, and I give 42 a towel. He comes out of the game, and I'm standing there, and I have no idea what to do. All I know is that in basketball, there's something called a rebound. And this is where if somebody shoots the ball and they miss it, or even if they make it, or whatever, you just want to get the ball, and you want to go to the other hoop and shoot it. So I'm looking. He's going to shoot. He shoots it. I don't know if he made it. I don't know if he didn't make it, but I grabbed it as fast as I could and took off running down the court, okay? Now, I was dribbling, okay? Some of you are like, were you just like, it wasn't football, okay? I know that much. But I'm going, and about half court, I realize no one's with me. Like, no one's following me. And I'm going, this is awesome. Like, I'm going to score. This is going to be great. We're going to go from 30 points behind to 28 points behind, and I'll be the hero. And so I go, and about mid-court, I start hearing whistles and people yelling, and I didn't realize it, but I was actually heading towards the wrong basket, okay? Which is why no one was following me. But I went anyway, and I attempted a layup, missed it, and I turned around only to find, like, everybody is mad at me. Like, A team, okay, they hated us because we existed, but they hated us even more because they were required to go to our games. So they all, like, stood up and turned around and protest, right? Like, my parents were there. They're like, where did we go wrong? What happened? And I had no idea until it was explained to me what even happened, okay? So I was the most disadvantaged person to have ever gone through Mustang middle school basketball. And to make matters worse, I finished out the season, and because I just love punishment, I went out again for it in 8th grade. Same thing, just repeat the process, okay? So some of you can relate because here's what we know to be true. We are all disadvantaged. And it's funny when we're talking about basketball. For some of you, you're like a sports person, and sports don't intimidate you, and they don't scare you. But for you, maybe technology scared you. Maybe you feel disadvantaged when it comes to technology. Like I FaceTime with my parents because they live in Oklahoma. And so a lot of times when I talk to my parents on FaceTime just so they can see our kids, this is the screen that I get from my parents, okay? Right here. Some of you kind of know what I'm talking about. I'm like, right here is what we need, okay? All right, and I know you're going to watch this, and no offense, but this is where it is, right here. This is what we see, and we need to get down there. But technology can be kind of intimidating because it's changing so rapidly. It's always different, and some of us can feel disadvantaged there. Some of you feel disadvantaged when it comes to clothing and fashion because you look around and you go, gosh, it's always changing, right? In 2006, you went out and bought a bunch of bootcut jeans, and you were like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to rock these for 10 years. And then all of a sudden, you're like, wait a second. What happened to all the bootcut jeans? Everything's all tapered, and you're like, I don't even want to do it. I'm going to rebel against that, whatever, okay? For some of you, when you go to people's houses, they have the most immaculate, clean houses that you've ever seen. It's like everything is always where it's supposed to be, everything is always clean, everything is always polished, and you're thinking, I hope this person never comes to my house, right? Because they will see a house that has been lived in, okay, which is a euphemism for an absolute dump, okay? That's what that is. But for some of you, like, and I can relate to that, like, it's hard to keep your house clean, it's hard to stay up with technology, and so we could feel disadvantaged, and all these kind of things are a little bit funny, but there's actually more serious ways that we can feel disadvantaged. For some of you, you might have a health concern. Like, you might have a chronic illness that has kind of been with you for a long time, and when you think about it, and you think about what could come from it, it causes you a lot of anxiety. I know for me, I had never struggled with any health concerns, never had any scares or anything. Went to the doctor, got some routine blood work, and some things come up that were a little bit abnormal, so I went in for a bunch of tests, right? MRIs and ultrasounds and all these different things, trying to figure out what was going on. And so I go into the doctor's office for like kind of the final, here's what's wrong with you thing, and I'm waiting, and this is the kind of doctor's office, they send you right to the office, there's no waiting, so you wait in there. And the walls are really thin, so I'm hearing him talking to other patients and waiting for that knock on the door. Some of you know what I'm talking about, the knock, knock, and they come in. He finally gets to my where I'm sitting. He walks in and he says, well, I hate to tell you this because I like you, but you have a progressive degenerative disease that is difficult to treat and impossible to cure and will eventually lead to your premature death. Well, anyway, I got to see other patients, but I'll send you to a specialist. We'll see you later. Bye. And he walks out of the room. And I sat there with a lot of questions and no answers, and I went and drowned my sorrows in a McFlurry at McDonald's and just wondered if I was going to live another 10 years. And so I know what it is to feel that sense of just helplessness when it comes to health, and it turns out the diagnosis was wrong, and it was indeed treatable, and everything's gonna hopefully be fine. It wasn't anywhere near what he thought, but in that moment, it was just, wow, this is scary. Am I going to get to see my daughters graduate high school and walk down the aisle and things like that? So all of us have disadvantages, and the thing that we need to understand is that we all have disadvantages, and all of us share in a sense of the disadvantage we have scares us. The disadvantage we have holds us back. The disadvantage we have can become our excuse. For some of us, it's not health and it's not technology or whatever. Maybe for some of us, it's your skin color. And you say, I feel a sense of I'm discriminated against because of the color of my skin, and I'm not given the same advantages that other people have. And so you would say just living life day to day is a challenge because of the world around you and how you're perceived. For some of us, it could be that you're, you can't pay your bills. You're in poverty. And there's just a sense of like, you look around at people that have money and you think, gosh, that their life would just be, it just seems so easy the way they live. It just seems like they have everything they need. If only I could do that. And there's there's a disadvantage of a lack of wealth, and there's also a disadvantage of too much wealth. Like that can ruin your life as well, which if you have too much wealth and you would like to, disperse of that wealth, let's talk and I can help you with that. But the thing is, all of us come at life with different disadvantages. And for some of you, it could be any one of these. And for others of you, it might not be something I mentioned, but you're just thinking in your mind, yes, for me, this is what it is. Like maybe you're a new follower of Christ, like you've just been following Jesus for a little bit, and you look around at people that you just think, man, these people have it all figured out. Like they know Jesus well, they know the Bible well, and I just don't, and it makes me feel a little bit insecure. Like I don't fit in here, or maybe I don't fit into other social situations. And so in all of these, every single one of us, I hope you can see, every single one of us, if we chose to, if we wanted to, we could hang on to a disadvantage and say, this is my excuse. This is why I will not be who God wants me to be. This is why I will not do what God's called me to do. And what we're going to see today is that all of us have a choice to make. Every single one of us has a choice to make, to either lean on our disadvantage or lean on the one who chose to be disadvantaged so we don't have to become that way. We don't have to stay that way. So let's get into it today. Here's what we're going to see. We're going to see that Jesus was disadvantaged. Jesus himself was disadvantaged. So we believe, this is what the Bible teaches. You may not believe this yet, but this is what we believe, that God loved us so much that he sent his son into the world to become one of us. And his son came into the world not as a king, right? If you think about how would God become a man and come into the world, you might think, well, he would come into the world with like power and prestige and wealth. No, he didn't do any of that. He actually came into the world as the lowest among us. He was born in a barn, and then he was laid in a contraption that's made to feed livestock. This is how Jesus came into the world. And so he not only had like humble beginnings, but he also was kind of from the wrong side of the tracks. Let's check this out. There's a passage here in John where Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, "We have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth." So he's all excited, like, this is the one, this is the Messiah, this is the one that, Moses pointed to, this is the guy. And here's what Nathanael says. He says, "Nazareth?" exclaimed Nathanael. "Can anything good come from Nazareth? Like, isn't that the kind of dumpy town on the other side of the tracks?" Like, Jesus was literally from the other side of the tracks. So I'm new to the area, and I'm new to Powell, and I live in the part of Powell that's right by the train. And I don't know, maybe somebody can explain this to me, but the train does this thing every day where like a mile-long train will just stop and block off like 4 roads at a time. And it's awesome because it happens during like rush hour and when kids are trying to get to school and when I'm trying to get to work. So it's great. And I don't know why that happens, but if you have an answer, please tell me, because apparently it's like part of Powell, and if I understand it, maybe I'll be okay with it. But that happens, right? But tracks, like train tracks, are a big deal. Like they divide cities and towns, and if you're from one side of the tracks, you're this kind of way, and if you're from that side of the tracks, you're that kind of way. And Jesus was from the wrong side of the tracks, and so not only did Jesus, the Son of God, not come into the world as a king and as powerful and as this ruler and this leader, he actually came to the world in humble circumstances and then stayed in humble circumstances to the extent where it's just mind-boggling to really wrap our mind around all of his disadvantages. Let's look at a few together. This will help us understand what Jesus kind of put himself through. He was homeless. In fact, there's a passage where Jesus says that foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Have any of you ever been homeless? Have you had a time where maybe you couldn't afford to live anywhere and you had to figure out how to make it? Jesus understands what that's like. Not only was he homeless, but he was tempted. The Bible teaches that he was led into the world. He was baptized. And then he was led into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end of that, he was tempted by Satan himself. Like he was tempted. Like Satan said, "Hey, just just make bread and give up on God and just eat and just be well fed." And he stood against that temptation. Have any of you ever been tempted? I know I have. Have you ever been tried in that way? Jesus has been tempted, and yet we'll see later that he overcame that and was without sin. But he knows what it is to be tempted. He knows what it is to know the right thing and want to do the wrong thing or be tempted to do the wrong thing. Let's see another one. He was lonely. There's an interesting story where Jesus was facing his death, his impending death. He knew that the job that he had to do was to die for the sins of the whole world. And this was coming. This is what he was going to face. And he was praying with his disciples, and he tells them to pray, and he comes back, and they had just fallen asleep, and he had to feel lonely. Maybe some of you have been going through something very difficult, and you wanted to rely on the people around you, that they could support you, and they could walk with you through it, they could pray with you, and you realize that you feel all alone in the struggle. Jesus can relate to that. East Campus, Jesus can relate to you when you feel a sense of, does anyone around me care? Because Jesus knows what it is to be lonely. Not only does he know what it is to be lonely, but Jesus knows what it is to be opposed. So what Jesus did was so countercultural. He went to the religious leaders of the day and he said, "You guys are getting it wrong. Like, you guys think this is all about knowledge and it's all about just knowing the Old Testament. It's all about just following the rules and being a good Pharisee. But I'm here to tell you that something has changed, that this is different, that God has a way of redeeming people back to him that has nothing to do with good works. It has to do with your faith in me." And this was a controversial message. And so Jesus faced opposition. And as a church, we face similar opposition because we do things differently. We're in a place that's got a lot of cultural Christians, people who think that they follow Jesus, people who think that they know Jesus, but really all they have is enough religion, enough ritual to inoculate them from an actual experience with Jesus. Which is why as a church, we want to help people discover Jesus, to experience Jesus and how their one life can make a difference. And so we do things differently to reach people that no one's reaching. So we face opposition, and so did Jesus, and maybe you face opposition. Maybe you face opposition at work when you live differently than other people, and maybe you reach out to people and you tell them about Jesus and you face opposition for that. Jesus knows what that is, to be opposed. Not only does he know that, he knows what it is to be dishonored. He says a prophet has no honor in his hometown. So even though he came from Nazareth, the other side of the tracks, even when Jesus went there, they were like, well, wait, isn't this Joseph's kid? Isn't this the carpenter? Like, why would we respect what he says? So even the Son of God knows what it is to be dishonored. Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you know what it is to be dishonored. Maybe you feel a sense of like, no one respects me and no one gives me what I'm due, and no one appreciates my contributions and talent. Not only was he dishonored, but he was betrayed and abandoned. We know that Judas betrayed him for just a little bit of money. And then Peter denied him 3 times after he died. And then his disciples just left. They just left town and they ran away in the moment where he needed their support more than anything. And maybe you've been betrayed and abandoned. Maybe you were betrayed by a good friend. Maybe you were betrayed by someone you trust. Maybe you were abandoned by a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister. Maybe they just walked out on you when you needed them, and you think back on that and you think, gosh, if only I had a family that was strong, that was connected, that was the way it's supposed to be. But I didn't. I had a broken family, you might be thinking. And you might be thinking, if only I had what other people have. If only I hadn't been betrayed. If only I hadn't been abandoned, then maybe I would have a chance at a fulfilling, full life. Well, Jesus knows what it is to be abandoned. Not only that, but he knows what it is to be falsely accused. So he was put on trial for crimes he didn't commit. He was put on trial, and ultimately they found no guilt against him, but he just was put to death anyway. And we know that this was part of God's plan, but he was still falsely accused. And maybe some of you have been falsely accused. Maybe you have been maligned by someone. Maybe people have built a case against you. Well, Jesus knows what that's like. And we know that he was mocked. That in the process of putting Jesus to death, they mocked him and they mocked his deity and they mocked what he claimed to be, that he claimed to be the Son of God. And they said, oh yeah, if you're the Son of God, then stop us. Maybe some of you have been mocked. Maybe you've been mocked because of your faith. Maybe you've been mocked for the stands that you take. Maybe you've been mocked because of the way that you've chosen to live your life. And Jesus knows what it is to be mocked. And then one more, Jesus was ultimately beaten and murdered. And so his disadvantagedness, his disadvantaged status is pretty strong. And I hope you can see that every single one of us who feel very acutely a sense of disadvantagedness, Jesus can relate at every single turn. And here's what's amazing about this. Jesus actually chose this. He chose to be disadvantaged so we don't have to stay that way. I hope you see this today. Jesus actually chose this. Now, any one of those list of disadvantages that Jesus faced, none of us would say, yes, I want that. Like, I choose that. I want to put that on. Disadvantages mostly happen to us, but Jesus chose this. Where do I get this? Well, in Philippians 2, the Apostle Paul's writing to this church in Philippi, and he's telling them about Jesus, and he says, though he, Jesus, was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. In other words, he was God, but he wasn't like, oh, I got to hang on to my godness. Like, I really need that right now. He was willing to let go of that. Instead, he says, he gave up. Everybody say, gave up. He gave up his divine privileges. What this means is that Jesus chose to. He willingly gave up the privileges that he had as the Son of God. Why? He goes on. He took the humble position of a slave. He was born as a human being. He humbled himself and died a criminal's death on the cross. So we see that he chose, he took, he humbled himself. Jesus was the active agent in his own disadvantages. This is an incredible thing, and I think from this we're going to see a few truths that I hope will help us deal with our own disadvantages. I hope that as we see the results of Jesus choosing to take on disadvantages so we don't have to stay that way, we'll see the implications of that. And the first one is this. We see that Jesus relates to our disadvantages more than we know. For some of us, I think that it's important to understand when you think about Jesus, it's hard sometimes to consider he gets me, he understands me, because we think, well, how would he? He's God, right? Well, the amazing thing about Christianity, and I've said this before, and I think this is important for us to understand, almost every major world religion teaches some version of this, that there's a God and he's up here, and you've got to work your way to God. Like, you've got to be good enough and you've got to get to God in some way. And yet Christianity is completely different. Christianity teaches that God actually became one of us, that he came down and entered humanity and suffered and died in our place for our sins. And so because of that, he relates. In fact, the writer of Hebrews says it this way: for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. He goes on, and he says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence. Everybody say it aloud, both campuses. 1, 2, 3. Confidence. Why do we have confidence? Is it because we've overcome? Is it because we have the strength? Is it because somehow we're able to upheave our disadvantages? No, it's because we have a high priest who is tempted in every way just as we are, and yet he didn't sin. So we approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And so when we're disadvantaged, what we need to understand is that not only does Jesus understand, he relates. Like he was there. He feels the pain that we feel. He knows what it is to suffer. He knows what it is to be betrayed. He knows what it is to suffer discrimination. He knows what it is to suffer disadvantaged in some way. He knows what it's like. And so he relates to us more than we know. And I think when we begin to understand this, then we can begin to do this. We begin to understand that our disadvantages show us how much we need Jesus' strength. Our disadvantages actually demonstrate to us how important it is for us to lean on not our own strength, but Jesus' strength. Because the tendency for us, the tendency for individualized and individualistic people that live, in the West is to say, I will bootstrap, right? I will stand up and I will be strong enough to overcome. And what the scriptures show us is that it's actually Jesus' strength that gets us through. There's a really interesting story about Paul. A few weeks ago, we talked about the life of Paul and how he was radically changed by Jesus. But there was something that happened in Paul. We don't know what it was, but he described it as a thorn in his flesh. And he says, in order that I don't become conceited, and in other words, so that I can stay humble, I have this thorn in my flesh. And I've prayed and begged God to take it away. What is the thorn? Most people think it's a metaphor for something else, right? Could be a weakness, could be, who knows what it is. There's only speculation. But Paul suffered with something. And he begged God to take it away 3 different times. For many of you, when you think about your disadvantage, when you think about what it is that plagues you, you're like, I have begged God to take this away. I have begged God to make this right. I have begged God to let me get through this. I have begged God to heal this disease. I have begged God to make this right. I have begged God to bring justice, and it just seems like there's silence. Here's what Jesus told Paul. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in what? In weakness. So he tells Paul, yes, I know you're suffering. Yes, I know you have this disadvantage, but here's what you need to understand. My power is actually more pronounced in weakness than it is in strength. Therefore, he says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. He goes on, that is why for Christ's sake I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. So this is an amazing thing that Paul basically is told to flip it on its head, to no longer view a disadvantage as a weakness, but an opportunity to lean on Jesus' strength. And this is totally countercultural, it's totally counterintuitive, but here's what's amazing about it. It's so liberating. It's so liberating to say, I'm no longer going to continue to battle this on my own. I'm no longer going to think that this is all on me. I'm no longer going to think I have to be the one to change this circumstance because this isn't on me, this is on God. And he promised that in my weakness he would be strong, and so I'm going to lean on that. Because here's what we know to be true. Jesus chose to be disadvantaged so we don't have to stay that way. And here's what's incredible about this. Jesus chose to be disadvantaged so we don't have to stay that way. But we're not that way. I hope you see that. When we're in Christ, if we know Jesus, if we've given our life to Christ, then this is not who we are. We're not defined. We talked about labels a few weeks ago. We're not defined by our disadvantage. We're defined by our relationship with Christ. And some of us have to see this differently. Here's what I mean. So I wear glasses. Okay, I've worn glasses or contacts since I was about 12 years old. And there's times where I will wear my glasses, and there are times when I'll wear sunglasses, but because I don't have prescription sunglasses, I have to put sunglasses on over my glasses, okay? Which is dangerous. I was driving the other day, and I didn't see somebody in the other lane, and I went over, and fortunately everything worked out. They honked, and they were mad. But my wife was like, did you not see that? I'm like, well, I have like 4 sets of lenses on, and it's kind of hard to see out of them. So I don't recommend that, but here's the thing. I refuse to get the clips. You know what I'm talking about? That, you know, your grandma had, like the clips that go down. Or what's even worse, transition lenses. You know what I'm talking about, where they darken in the sun and they get bright. They're pretty much always dark, okay? And if you have those, I'm sorry. We'll see you at Comic-Con when it comes on. But anyway, so here's the thing about lenses. The only difference between everybody in here being completely fuzzy, I can't see anybody in here, East Campus can't see you either. Everybody in here is fuzzy, right? Until I put on these glasses and I'm seeing you in beautiful 4K and you look amazing, all right? The only difference was the perspective. The only difference was the lens that I'm looking through. For a lot of us, when it comes to our disadvantages, we need to look through a different lens. So when we think about our disadvantages, maybe it's that God allowed us to go through a certain thing so that we could help others. So you have a health concern, right? Imagine the opportunities that you have around that. The nurses, the doctors, the other people that suffer from that, if you got through it or if you're going through it, to be able to help people that I would never be able to help without that concern. If you've been discriminated against because of the color of your skin, imagine the platform that you have to make change in the world for better. If you are abused in some way growing up, you're abandoned and abused, imagine how you can use that to motivate you to make a difference in the lives of people who have been abused and abandoned. We talked about how the pain of my past becomes the passion for my platform. And so it could be that God allows us to go through certain things and then gives us the strength of Jesus, knowing that he chose this so we don't have to stay that way, so that we can say, this is not who I am. This is not my identity. In Christ, I am an overcomer. I have been bought and paid for by Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. So I no longer even belong to myself. I belong to Jesus. And so when I go through this, Jesus and I go through it. When I go through something, God and I go through it. And so maybe we need to see from a different perspective. And maybe we need to realize that this isn't who I am. It doesn't define me, that Jesus actually defines me differently. And here's what's amazing. We'll end with this. We'll wrap up with this idea. Jesus didn't stay disadvantaged either. And I love this. So as we wrap up, let's check this out. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names. He goes on, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. What's amazing about this, and I love this idea, when we think about Jesus, we can think about him in one of two ways. We can think he's the suffering servant that's our example and that is our strength and there for us when we need him, and that's true. But we can also think of him that he's no longer there, like he's no longer on the cross. He's no longer in the grave. He rose and he is now with God, and we derive our strength from him, and so he is the ruling king. So when we look to Jesus, as Hebrews says, Hebrews 12, he says, let us look only to Jesus, the one who began our faith and the one who makes it perfect. And so if you're sitting here and you're saying, you know what, this sounds great, except my faith is weak. Like my trust in God is weak when I experience disadvantage. Well, the amazing thing is when we look to Jesus, we're looking to the one who overcame it all. We're looking to the one who is now sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. He is ruling over all creation. And so when we look to Jesus, we're looking to someone who initiated our faith and who is capable of making it perfect. And so imagine this as a church. Imagine if we began to see differently. Imagine if we had an inverted perspective, as counterintuitive as it is, and as countercultural as it is. What if we said, we're going to choose not to see life through a lens of disadvantage, but we're going to choose to see life through the fact that Jesus gives us strength, that he overcame, and in him, we no longer have to stay this way. All of us, every single one of us, are disadvantaged in some way. And so my hope, my prayer for every single one of us is that we would leave today not saying we're going to muster up the strength to overcome, but we're going to look to Jesus. We're going to rely on him. We're going to put our trust even more soundly in him, because it's him that overcomes and not us. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are the one who overcomes, and you are the one who chose the disadvantages that none of us would choose. But you chose to be that way. You chose to take that on so we don't have to stay that way. We thank you for that. As we continue to pray, I wonder how many in here would say, when you consider your life, when you consider what you've gone through and your disadvantages, you would say, more than anything, you want to know what it's like to experience the strength of Jesus. You want to know what it's like to give that over to him and let him have it. If that's you, would you just raise your hand? I'd like to pray for you. We no longer want to live through the lens of our disadvantage. We want to give that to Jesus. God, I pray for those with hands raised, and mine as well. As we declare to you, we want more than anything to experience your strength, not ours. We want to experience the hope and the life that you bring in the midst of challenges, in the midst of disadvantage. God, we want to experience that. So God, give us that today. As we continue to pray for others of us, you might be thinking about Jesus. We talked a lot about him today, and here's something I hope we don't miss today as we talk about Jesus. That Jesus came and was disadvantaged, but it wasn't just so that we could live a better life now. It wasn't just so that we could overcome today. It was so that for eternity we could have a relationship with him. And so for some of you, when you think about Jesus and you think about the fact that he came, that he lived in your place, that he lived the life that you could never live, that I could never live, and he died for your sins in your place, you just have to come to the place where you realize you've never trusted in that. You've never given your life to Jesus and said, I'm tired of doing this on my own. I'm tired of being the one to call the shots in my life. I want to give my life over to you. Well, you can do that right where you sit. There's nothing magical about it. It's a position of your heart to say, I'm tired of living for myself. I'm tired of doing this my own way. I want to give it all to you, Jesus. Take my life. Forgive me of my sins. Make me a new person. If you declare that to God, if you tell God that today, and you mean it, here's what the amazing thing that happens. All of this stuff about Jesus, the fact that he came and he lived and he died, it applies to you now. And so you're a follower of Jesus, which means that your disadvantages are not your own, they're shared with Jesus. And so don't leave here today without letting somebody know that you've done that. In just a moment, we're going to stand and sing a song called I Am No Longer a Slave to Fear, but I am a child of God. And the amazing thing about this song is it declares everything we've talked about. I'm a child of God. That is my identity. So for some of you, you may want to pray with somebody. You're welcome to use this stage as your altar. East Campus, same thing there to come forward. We don't do this very often, but you're welcome to come forward and pray. There will be people here to pray with you if you'd like that, or if you just want to pray by yourself as we declare to God that we are his and no longer slaves to fear. Let's stand and sing.